I caught up with Phil Doland at the 2025 Festival of Italian Motorcycles in Melbourne, and he agreed to talk about his Italjet and Clymer Indian collection.
Yeah, hello Michael. It's probably time I did talk about this collection of Italjets and other things. It's been something of a lifetime's work, as you well know. 1976 I bought this gold one as a teenager without really knowing anything about the history of the marque at all. But it was distinctly Italian, so it fitted in with all my Ducatis at the time. And the rest of my life to this point in time, I've been chasing the entire story that became an Italjet story, which started with this particular bike, the Griffin, that was being made in 1979 from 1966 onwards. And it expanded to cover these Indians that were made for Floyd Clymer. A story that has been misunderstood over the years. There's been so many different variations of what really happened or didn't happen. I've managed to track down most of the story with a lot of help from people who were there on the day. And one of the ironic fallouts was the Rickman Interceptor. This is a bike I bought many, many years ago without knowing it had an association to the rest of the bikes here now. I've owned them and ridden them all in the past. I will ride them again in their current state, but they've only just been done and it's taken me, sadly, almost 50 years to get the job done. But as everyone who knows me, you in particular, know that I don't work that fast. I think the history of these bikes is quite an interesting story. I don't think we have time to do it all now. And the potted history is that Italjet had something of a unique parallel to the Rickman brothers that made chassis. Rickman made chassis in England and Italjet made chassis in Italy. They built frames for all kinds of bikes that we don't even know about now, and they built their own models based on English engines, British engines of obscure types, some of the two-strokes, Yamahas, MZs, all kinds of engines over a short period of time from 66 through to about 1971. And they eventually became a mainstream supplier of scooters, I suppose, in the time, and that's probably what they're most recognised for now, but they had such a diverse history prior to that. It's an interesting read. I have slowly become something of an expert because I was making parts to reproduce effectively Italjet parts you couldn't buy any longer, and I've fed the restoration market worldwide for these particular three models, the Italjet, Griffin and the two Clymer bikes. So I'm fairly well established, and as a consequence people have contacted me telling me the stories of their own bikes, and it's enabled me to build up a good database and verify what still exists and what doesn't. Of the three bikes, even though the Griffin is essentially the beginning of the story, in a surprise, it turns out to be the most difficult to find, and by a large margin. This bike was never sold outside of Italy officially, though these days most seem to be in Switzerland and Germany. They've all been exported in the sort of 70s, 80s, 90s, and I only know of 12 existing examples. There's probably more, but they've yet to come my way in terms of pictures or other information from owners. The production quantity is known. It was 75 bikes. In a similar vein, this particular Royal Enfield Indian, which was made at the same time, they've all come off the production line in 1970. That's why there's such a huge similarity between all the bikes. That is the lowest available of the Clymer series bikes. It is probably only 30 remaining that I've come across in all these years. They probably made 60. It's been a little bit hard to verify the full amount of production, but 60 to 80 would be the maximum. The Velocette, on the other hand, which actually came in two different variants. They used both the Thruxton engine and a Venom engine. The bikes are not identical and you can't really convert one to the other. The Thruxton version was only produced for a run of 50 bikes, and the Venom version, which this one is, was produced for around 140. These bikes, the Velocettes, are the most well known of all the Clymer bikes, and that's the one that typically has been in the press all these years. The Enfield, which is its companion, was relatively unknown. There's many Velocette owners I've spoken to that didn't even realise that existed. I've taken pains to make sure I get the entire collection. In fact, there's still one more Velocette at home that I'm intending to paint in the last optional colour, which was pink. Oddly enough, it didn't sell well, and they replaced it with this gold version, which is the most common variety. Well, the Rickman is something of an afterthought. The circumstances, of course, when Floyd Clymer died, is the finances to Italjet stopped immediately. At that point in time, there were around 120 engines on the docks in the UK destined for Italjet. Unfortunately, there was a bill to go with that and nobody wanted to pay it, so the engines remained as the property of the shipping agent. Again, it's something of a puzzle as to how a shipping agent stuck with all this stock would come up with the brilliant idea of ringing up the Rickman brothers that wasn't too far down the road, as it turns out, and say to them, I've got all these engines, how about we build a motorbike? And that's exactly what happened. So the Rickman chassis for this Interceptor, whilst not potentially their first road bike, because of course Rickmans are known for their motocross series, it was their first commercially available road bike chassis. All the other Rickman Matisses that you see with Hondas and Kawasaki's came after this. This was the progenitor of that series of bikes. So here it is. They took all the remaining stock of engines that should have been in that Clymer Indian and made that motorcycle to get rid of those engines. An amazing amount of work, but it turned out to be quite an acceptable motorcycle. It's got many features that were ahead of its time because it's got disc brakes front and rear, and it handles well. It does everything you'd expect it to be. It's quite reliable. I do enjoy riding it, but in the end of the day, it is a big vibrating British twin, and I'd actually prefer to say I'd ride the Triumph instead. And the Velocette is no doubt the pick of the crop of those three bikes.
Thanks, Phil. That was a great introduction to a pretty much unknown part of Italian motorcycle history. So that's all for now, and I'll catch you next time.